Hi, my name is Brian Freking. I'm an area livestock specialist for Oklahoma State University. We're going to put together a management calendar for goat producers on the practices you might consider for the calendar year. And when I think about the month of January, it's usually the month that we stay indoors and maybe think about kind of the whole calendar year and maybe think about some of the practices we might want to include in that year, and maybe change some things that may have not gone so well in the previous year. Things that come to mind are to consider benchmarks for the industry. The things that come to mind that are two key components for profitability in any livestock production system are the income and expenses. And so within each one of those categories, we want to start breaking down that enterprise. And so one thing I think of in a goat operation or even a sheep operation is going to be the number of kids born, what month of the year or most of them born, the percent weaned, of course, that's going to be our sales, and the weight at which they reach weaning is going to be a driver in profitability. The expense side, we're going to be looking at stocking rates. Was our overhead costs, how can we do anything about those expenses? Of course, feed is a big portion of those enterprises, and then of course any labor or vet charges, that kind of stuff. Now, weather always plays a factor into every year, and so you always at least want to take a note of what happened in that year. Maybe it was a drought, or maybe it was a really good producing year, lots of rain. And maybe with lots of rain and lots of heat, we might have had a parasite issue. So weather is still one of those benchmarks you want to consider in your planning sessions. The next slide I have is a timeline, and it's designed to showcase maybe entering a male goat into the Oklahoma buck test. And so we need to consider the points on that timeline. What are the critical stages we need to consider? So when do we put the buck out? Should we use teaser bucks, and at what time? So in this particular timeline, we're looking at maybe March 1st as being the average birth date of the operation, and so we've got to back calculate. So we know that gestation length is somewhere around 150 days. So when do I need to have that buck in with those does, and how can I get the most does pregnant in a short period of time? Because if we can increase those kid crops and they wean off at a good rate, it's going to improve our production system. So this one is geared towards a timeline for the buck test, and so we may be looking at March 1st as a possible date. And so when they're delivered later in the year to the test site, they've got to meet a minimum weight requirement. And so March 1st might have been the average birth date of the herd, but we may have had to pick some that were born a little earlier, maybe as early as January. And so these are critical components we might want to think about. Then we also want to think about our forage production. How can we manage the herd to increase the amount of forages that the animals harvest themselves, and thus making our feed bill a lot cheaper. So even though I've presented a timeline for a buck test, this next slide shows some research data out of Tennessee State showing, looking at months and number of kids born and the survival rate for each one of those months. And so we, as a commercial producer, we may make a decision on our overall program based on this kind of data. And so the 2 months that kind of stand out in this slide are March and April. So we're getting close to 2 kids born, and then the survival rate is much better in those 2 months. So every spot in the country may have a little bit different result. And so I think in the month of January we want to consider these things. And we may also start looking at our genetics. You know, are we using the right females to produce the most number of offspring per mating? And anytime we can increase our weaning rate, it spreads our cost over a larger number, And so it tends to give us a little better profitability. So I hope this helps you think of some things in the month of January.